December 7th, 2023 at 11:03 a.m., a faint transmission broke through the radio.
Anyway, head off 10 miles west, 2 Alpha 0 is 2.
Seconds later, another voice, quieter, came across the frequency.
Oh, the hell no.
Less than a minute after that, the airplane was descending at more than 10,000 feet per minute, but that wasn't how this flight began. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken. Lots of people posted videos right after this crash and after the NTSB preliminary report, and it looked rather obvious what had happened based on the final flight and the previous flights documented by the pilot on her YouTube channel. But this tragic story has a surprise ending from what we first thought when the crash happened. Jenny Blalock was a public figure on the social media sites going by Tennessee Fly Girl. While I've moved towards avoiding names on these crash reports, with the publicity and notoriety of this particular event, it would be distracting to not use her name. For the family and friends of Jenny left behind, the last couple of years have not been easy for you, and I get that. And this is such a horrible and senseless tragedy. But there are some important takeaways that can save a life or two, and we'll cover that at the end. There are two shocking pieces to this tragedy, and we'll start with the obvious. Jenny Blalock was a 44-year-old Tennessee-based content creator and aviation enthusiast who shared much of her flying journey publicly. She documented her progress from student pilot to aircraft owner, building an audience that followed her path through general aviation. What began as flight training in 2021 evolved into aircraft ownership and cross-country flying, a journey she shared openly with thousands of followers. In June 2021, she purchased a Piper PA-28140. That's a fixed-gear, fixed-propeller airplane commonly used for primary instruction. This is the Piper Cherokee. That airplane became the platform for nearly all of her early training. Owning the aircraft she trained in meant she had consistent access to it, and most of her dual instruction time for her private certificate was accumulated in that Piper. Then 11 months later, May 2022, she earned her private pilot certificate. Now, at the time of her practical test, she had logged 193.2 total flight hours in 11 months. Of those 193.2 hours, 182.6 hours were logged as dual instruction received from instructors. This all begs the question, is that a substantially high amount of time before getting your private pilot certificate? Well, it depends. I'm training a crew person with my company. We go on long cross countries, but he gets busy and he hasn't really been able to beat up the pattern and really work towards getting that certificate. It's been 3 or 4 years. We still do long cross countries. And by the time he does his private check ride, I bet he'll be well over 200 hours. But it makes sense. In 11 months with almost 200 hours of training, that's a substantial amount. She averaged 18 hours a month, and that's a pretty solid training schedule. Now, to be fair, we don't know if she took a month or two off and then flew 30 hours a month for a couple of months. But packing 193 hours in 11 months, that's intense training. And she could have been just an extremely cautious person who had to be totally prepared before the check ride. But having watched her videos, now it's my opinion only, I didn't see that. What would be normal? Well, a Part 61 training, that's a go-at-your-own-pace type of training. Let's say 2 or so flights a week. That might take you 6 to 8 months and 50 to 60 hours. If you are the cautious type, I know one pilot who is a good pilot, tested closer to 80 because he just wanted the practice. He was ready a lot earlier, but just wanted to be sure. And then you do have the outlier, and that's the flight school who will keep you training to bring in revenue, as long as you're writing the checks. But contrary to all the social media flame wars out there, that's actually relatively rare. It does happen, but it's not all the time. I could find no indication that Jenny was being milked in her training by the school, and she had her own plane for the training, so not like the school is making a ton of revenue off of her, but it all begs the question, why was the total significantly higher than minimum standards? That's a fair question. The final report does not provide specific information about the frequency or cadence of Jenny's training, and it does not indicate any check ride failures. What it does show is that the majority of her flight time at certification had been accumulated under instructor supervision. At the time she earned her private certificate, only approximately 10.6 hours had been logged as solo time. After earning her certificate, she sold the small Cherokee, and on July 13, 2022, she purchased a 1965 Beechcraft 35 C-33 Debonair, registered as November 5891 Juliet. Unlike the Piper she had trained in, a fixed-gear, fixed-pitch propeller airplane, the Debonair was a retractable gear aircraft equipped with a constant-speed propeller and capable of significantly higher cruise speeds. It qualified as both a high-performance and a complex aircraft, requiring additional training and specific endorsements to operate legally. And it's not clear in the NTSB report if she had those. She probably did. They don't have those records. Now, transitioning from a fixed gear trainer into a faster, more systems-intensive airplane is not uncommon in general aviation. I did it. I was flying Cessna 150s, then some 172s, and then I bought a Cessna 210, a high-performance, complex airplane. But it does increase cockpit workload. The pilot must now manage landing gear, propeller settings, power changes, energy control more precisely, especially during climbs, descents, and approach phases. And here's the key. Things just happen a whole lot faster. It is so easy to get behind the aircraft. And for non-pilots, this is a critical problem that we're taught to avoid as pilots. Getting behind the aircraft means you're reacting to everything instead of anticipating and being prepared. Maybe in the Cessna 152, I had minutes in the pattern to prepare for landing. In the 210, I might have seconds, and there's a whole lot more to do. The key skill set is anticipating. You know a turn is coming. You prep everything in advance. If ATC is going to be calling you, you've thought through what they're going to say. It's all fairly predictable, and you want to get ahead of it. If you wait to think through these things, wait to work the technology until it's needed, well, it doesn't take but one or two things to catch you by surprise. The workload increases, and suddenly you're behind the aircraft. To understand this crash, it's critical to understand all of that. As she transitioned into the Debonair, instructors who conducted training flights with her observed that she was at times behind the aircraft and struggled with managing trim inputs and workload in the more complex airplane. Those observations were made during instructional flights as she adapted to the new platform, and over the following year, she flew the Debonair extensively. According to surviving logbook entries reviewed by the NTSB, she had accumulated approximately 390 total flight hours by August of 2023, about 200 of those hours in the Debonair itself. That's another 200 hours a year pace, a very healthy amount of flying that would make most pilots proficient. That means roughly half of her total flight experience had been gained in this aircraft. In September of 2023, she publicly shared that she had reached 400 total flight hours, a milestone she appeared proud to mark in her aviation journey. And by late 2023, she was an aircraft owner with roughly 200 hours in a high-performance retractable gear airplane, regularly flying cross-country trips and documenting those experiences for her audience. And then those videos she posted on YouTube, pulled down since the crash, but I watched several before that happened. She posted videos of basically showing her being way behind the aircraft, turning left thinking she was going right.
I'm going the opposite direction. Look.
Look right here, your plane's turned like it's not heading.
And watching those videos, you either shook your head, or I even wondered if she was just staging this for the drama of it. Her most recent FAA third-class medical certificate had been issued in January 2023, which we'll talk about in a moment. On the morning of December 7th, 2023, Jenny prepared for a 430 nautical mile cross-country flight from Knoxville downtown Island Airport in Tennessee to Benton, Arkansas, where the Debonair would get some avionics upgrades. The flight was conducted under Part 91 as a personal flight. On board with her was a 78-year-old passenger, her father. He had flown with her several times previously. He was on some of the other videos, and this day was likely no different. She regularly filmed many of her flights to upload to her YouTube channel, but her cameras apparently weren't running on this flight, according to the NTSB. 2 cameras were found damaged in the wreckage, but one card had no current flight footage and the other was unrecoverable. Weather conditions along the route were visual. Skies were clear, winds were light. There was nothing in the forecast suggesting that this would be anything other than a routine cruise. At 9:48 a.m. local time, the Debonair lifted off. The initial climb was uneventful. Communications with air traffic control were normal.
This is Center, Debonair 5891 Juliet.
5891 Juliet, Memphis International, altimeter 3022, verify 6,600.
Yes, that's correct. Affirmative.
The airplane climbed and turned onto a ground track of approximately 255 degrees. It leveled at 2,500 feet for about 12 minutes before continuing its climb to 6,500 feet. One interesting ADSB readout was shortly before leveling off at 6,500. The airspeed actually dipped to 84 knots, really slow. Now, she might have hit a gust or was trying to climb quicker for that last push to 6,500. They had, at this point, 40 minutes left to live. And during this 40 minutes, altitude and airspeed began to vary significantly. By approximately 10:10 a.m., 22 minutes into the flight, the airplane had reached the cruising altitude of 6,500 feet around Watts Bar Lake. For roughly 10 more minutes, it maintained altitude with a ground speed just under 130 knots, tracking generally westbound towards Arkansas. Then something subtle began to shift. At first, the deviations were small. The airplane would climb a few hundred feet above its assigned altitude and then descend back through it. Airspeed would increase in descent and decrease again in climb. These are expected aerodynamic relationships. Pitch affects airspeed, airspeed affects vertical performance. Normally, small corrections dampen those out quickly. The autopilot was on by the track, and the old Century 2000 did not have an auto trim feature. A light would flash from the autopilot informing the pilot a trim adjustment needed to be made, and then the pilot would push a button to trim in the direction the autopilot indicated till the autopilot was happy. In this case, they did not. Over the next several minutes, the fluctuations became more pronounced. Altitude varied by as much as 1,500 feet. Airspeed fluctuated between roughly 100 and 160 knots. The rate of climb alternated between descents of approximately 1,200 feet per minute and climbs approaching 500 feet per minute. It was getting worse and worse. In a high-performance aircraft like the Debonair, pitch control is closely tied to trim management, specifically the elevator trim. And for those non-pilots, let me get into the weeds a little on what trim is and what it does in an airplane. The elevator is the large control surface running horizontal on the backside of the horizontal stabilizer, that small wing on the tail of the airplane. The elevator, like the name implies, changes the pitch of the airplane up or down. Trim is usually a small control surface on the larger control surface that you can tweak, making smaller corrections that is controlled by a wheel by the pilot with cables back to that control surface. In this example picture of a Debonair, you can see the white wheel on the underside of the panel on the left. And some planes have both elevator and rudder trim, like my 210, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. When forward or aft pressure builds on the control yoke, You have to muscle the yoke to keep the pitch neutral. Trim is applied to relieve that pressure. And the idea is that a properly trimmed aircraft will just about fly itself. You could fly with just one little pinky on the yoke. If a trim input overshoots even slightly, the aircraft can respond more aggressively than intended. And that response then demands another correction. And if each correction is slightly larger than the last, the cycle can amplify. Student pilots often have trouble learning to trim as they try to fly with the trim wheel. The idea is to fly with the yoke and then trim the pressure out. Now, add in an old technology autopilot like the Century 2000. This autopilot does not have auto trimming. Instead, it flashed a light that indicates an adjustment is needed by the pilot. You then push the up or down button on the right-hand side of the autopilot to get it back into trim. And here's the important part. In the NTSB investigation, talking to her instructors, Jenny had issues trimming up when she meant to trim down and vice versa. And she would repeatedly push the buttons according to her instructor, and he would tell her just to gently press the button down or up until it corrected. Now, since the old Century doesn't have auto trim, most likely she could either push the buttons or even adjust the trim wheel. It actually depends on the model. But again, instructors said she got confused by the trim system quite a bit. By around 10:30 a.m., the vertical profile had taken on a repeating wave pattern, and what had begun as modest altitude variation was now a sustained oscillation. Air traffic control began to notice.
November 9-1 Juliet, I have you going to Sierra Uniform Zulu, is that correct?
Affirmative. 9-1 Juliet.
I show you well left the course.
Yeah, I'm correcting for that. 9-1 Juliet.
Okay, thanks.
At one point, the controller advised that the airplane was well left of course. She acknowledged the call and indicated she was correcting, but radar track showed only a modest correction, and the deviations continued. Around 10:59 a.m., the airplane's airspeed decreased from approximately 160 knots to around 140 knots, while level at roughly 4,500 feet. Moments later, it began climbing again, passing back above 6,000 feet. The controller attempted twice to contact her with instructions to contact Memphis Center for a handoff. There was no response.
November 9-1 Juliet, contact Memphis Center 125.85. November 5891 Juliet, contact Memphis 125.85.
Inside the cockpit, workload would have been increasing steadily. Maintaining altitude, adjusting pitch, managing power, monitoring navigation, handling radio communications, all while the airplane continued to climb and descend in increasingly unstable cycles. Panic might have set in as she couldn't make it stop. It only got worse. And by the way, again, for non-pilots, there's sadly an easy solution to this situation. Disconnect the autopilot and fly by hand and get the airplane back under control, which is something the instructors said she would do. It's unknown why she didn't do it this time. Now, they only had minutes to live.
Manual handoff 10 miles west, 2 Alpha 0 is 2540.
At 11:03 a.m., a faint transmission came across the frequency. Within seconds, the airplane began a left turn. Its descent rate increased rapidly, approximately 2,000 feet per minute at first. Airspeed climbed past 170 knots. The descent steepened. Radar data showed the airplane accelerating to approximately 228 to 230 knots. The descent rate exceeded 10,000 feet per minute. Air traffic control attempted again to establish communication for a frequency change. There was no response.
Hey, do you still got that 9-1 Juliet? I'm not showing him. He's not over here. No, I don't. I've tried to reach him. All right. I'll try him again. Yeah. November 5891 Juliet. November 5891 Juliet, Memphis. November 10 22 Foxtrot, contact Memphis Center on 120.8.
20.8, 22 Foxtrot, good day.
November 5891 Juliet, 5891 Juliet, Memphis.
Hamilton, Huntsville, handoff. Thank you.
November 5891 Juliet, November 5891 Juliet, Memphis.
2019.
The other thing is this 891 Juliet. She was on me and deviated, like, I noticed that she was coming on that track. So I asked her, was she deviating weather? And she was like, well, I'm correcting back. I handed him off to 42, and I went to switch him. I got busy, went to switch him, and he never took the switch. So I was going around with other traffic. And then 42 called and was like, hey, what's the deal with this guy? So from there, we could never pick her back up. They're trying to find her. We tried to call her on guard. We tried to get in the relay.
What was she at? You don't remember?
I honestly don't know.
Okay.
The Debonair impacted wooded terrain near Pulaski, Tennessee. The airplane was destroyed. Both Jenny and her 78-year-old passenger were fatally injured. The entire sequence, from the first subtle oscillations to impact, had unfolded in less than an hour. So what happened inside that cockpit? In the days and months that followed, investigators examined more than just the final descent. They analyzed a 25-minute period of sustained pitch oscillations, the position of the airplane's trim system at impact, and interviews with instructors who had previously expressed concerns about workload management in the Debonair. Examination of the wreckage revealed no evidence of structural failure prior to impact. Flight control cable separations were consistent with overload, not pre-existing brakes. The propeller blades displayed chord-wise scratching and leading-edge gouging consistent with rotation at impact, suggesting the engine was producing power. The magneto switch was found in the both position. There was no indication of engine failure. The airplane had not broken apart in flight. Attention then turned to the pitch control system. Investigators documented that the elevator trim actuator corresponded to approximately 5 degrees of trim tab trailing edge down. In practical terms, that trim position would tend to drive the nose of the airplane upward unless countered with forward pressure on the control yoke. Over time, this can develop into what is commonly referred to as pilot-induced oscillation, a condition in which the pilot's corrective inputs are slightly out of phase with the airplane's responses, causing each correction to increase rather than dampen the motion. Radar and NTSB data showed a vertical profile consistent with sustained oscillations, repeated climbs and descents with corresponding airspeed increases and decreases. These oscillations continued for approximately 25 minutes before the final descent. 25 minutes of that roller coaster. What is clear from the data is that the airplane did not enter a stall spin sequence typical of an abrupt loss of control. Instead, it was the pilot-induced oscillations. But mechanical configuration was only part of the picture. The most surprising information, something that wasn't clear on her videos, was what came out in the toxicology. Post-mortem toxicology testing detected the presence of alprazolam and its metabolite alpha-hydroxyalprazolam. Alprazolam is a benzodiazepine commonly prescribed for anxiety and is known to have sedating effects. Trazodone and buspirone were also discussed in the report. Now, trazodone is often prescribed for depression or sleep disorders and buspirone for anxiety. The report notes that these medications can alter cognitive function, reaction time, and motor coordination. However, due to limitations in post-mortem toxicology interpretation and the inability to determine precise blood concentration levels at the time of the accident, investigators were unable to conclude the extent to which these substances contributed to this accident. But the presence of these medications was not publicly known prior to the release of the final report. As a matter of fact, in the docket, in an interview with Jenny's sister, even the sister was unaware of these medications that Jenny was taking. Alprazolam is Xanax. That drug alone is a hard no-go medication for pilots. It suppresses the central nervous system activity. It slows alertness, increases fatigue, delays decision-making. It slows your motor responses. Instructors in the docket talked about her problems handling radios. The alprazolam would explain some of that. Now, add to that the trazodone. In low doses, it's prescribed as a sleep aid. It makes you drowsy. In higher doses, it's used to treat depression, but it sedates you. And the same problem is with Xanax. It's a no-go for pilots. You need to be alert, on your game, ready to make decisions when flying an airplane. Finally, the buspirone. This is a psychoactive medication used for anxiety disorder, and it takes weeks to take effect. And while it's non-sedating, it does have a dizziness side effect. Again, just one of these three would be a no-go for a pilot according to the FAA. And since she got issued her medical, it's clear she did not disclose the usage of these drugs. Bottom line, these three drugs are extremely bad news for a pilot. And let's remember, this was a person, a daughter, a business owner, a member of a family that will live with this loss forever, and a 78-year-old passenger, a father who trusted the person in the left seat. This is not just an accident report. It's a tragedy for these real people. And here's my takeaway. It's critical to be honest with myself, with my capabilities and my abilities. And short of that, to give permission to people in my life to speak honestly to me about that. Undoubtedly, there were some things Jenny was very good at. I wish she had found passion in one of those things. Instructors warned her and her father. They even agreed, but they continued to fly. They continued to be behind the airplane. The FAA talks about the 5 hazardous attitudes, and you could argue that all 5 were hit in this crash. Anti-authority. The rules don't apply to me. I can take whatever medications I want. The antidote is to remember that the rules were written in blood and to follow the rules. Impulsivity. Let's just do it quickly. It'll all work out. Instead, I need to remember to think it through. Macho. I can do it. I'm Han Solo. It's all worked out in the past. Why would it change? I need to keep in mind that taking chances is foolish. This isn't some movie. There's real consequences. And you can sadly hear it in her voice toward the end, resignation. I need to stay in the fight. And finally, the 5th, invulnerability. It can't happen to me. This sad story reminds me it can happen to me. I must be real with myself, and before each flight, am I up to it? Am I trained? Am I proficient? And if ever I'm not, then it's okay to not fly that day. Hoover over at Pilot Debrief has created a fantastic new risk assessment tool for pilots. If you fly, check it out at risk.pilotdebrief.com. It's a great tool that could save your life. And that's our video today. Thank you for watching the report. And I want to thank our sponsors like Flying Eyes. These are the best glasses under headsets and helmets. Go to flyingeyesoptics.com/takingoff10 for 10% off your order. I absolutely love my Flying Eyes. I get asked about them all the time, especially when I just slide them off and on inside the headsets. And if you haven't seen one of our other final reports, you can watch it by clicking here. Thanks again. Please subscribe and leave your comments. I enjoy engaging with you. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.